6 foot, never. Not even on accident. One day I got out to practice and Coach Eckelman, we said, today Tim, we're going to do the high jump before your distance workout. Maybe your muscles just haven't been fresh enough. All right, Coach. And he took me out and the high jump pit was all set up. And I 3-step, 5'8", no worries. 5'9", no problem. Full approach, 5'10", 5'11", 5'11 and 3/4. Made it every time. Had it on video. Cleared 5'11 and 3/4 by almost 5 inches. He moved it up 1/4 of an inch to 6 foot. And I missed it 12 times straight. Today wasn't the day, Coach. Head down. He said, no, come over here, Tim. And he grabbed the tape measure and he grabbed the dumb end of it, as my dad called it, and let me have the smart end. That's the one with the numbers. And I lifted it up and I put it by the bar and I just looked. He had taken that high jump standard into the shop class and he had moved the measuring sticks that were on it by 2.5 inches. I cleared 6 foot 2.5 by over 5 inches. But I had this block in my head that wouldn't allow me to clear 6 foot. So he removed that block. Today my school record still holds in that small town at 6 foot 7 inches. As a little bitty 5 foot 9 inch guy. Frank's looking at me going, that's another thing I didn't know about you. Just recently it said in here I became an ordained minister. I always thought my call would come from God, but Frank called me up and said, would you conduct my wedding? Are you licensed? I said, I'm not, but I will. So my call to the ministry came from Frank. So if you want to know somebody with power, make sure you see Frank right here. Ladies and gentlemen, this next speaker I have never met before. However, I feel I know him intimately. You see, he left the United States military as a captain. The United States Army, to be more specific. I also left the United States Army as a captain. I spent most of my career in the infantry. He got thrust into it in one assignment. He told me a little story about our first speaker, Oscar. Oscar actually worked for him twice. I asked him, did you fire him? He said, no, once Oscar left before I had a chance, and the other time I left before I had a chance. Not really. Oscar, you're safe. But he said, there's one individual who's worked for him 4 times, so Oscar doesn't even hold that record. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking so forward to hearing what Mr. Cartwright has to say, because I grew up, I spent my life leaning on the Cartwrights. Of course, they were on Bonanza. And I'm sure what you have to say, I'm just really looking forward. Dream Saver, Mr. Jeff Cartwright.
A few people have asked me earlier today what Dream Saver is about. I wasn't going to talk about that, but since it's been asked about 5 times and I postponed it, I will. Dream Saver is a small startup company, and I have never been with a startup company. We have exactly 1.5 employees, and I'm the CEO on a volunteer pro bono basis. And that is to say, it's time for me to add something back without the expectation of a return. And so I'm helping out a friend of mine who I've known for 17 or 18 years. He's a serial entrepreneur, and I don't know that that's a good term. Serial entrepreneur to me means they've never been successful yet. But Chris is going to be successful this time out. And but Dream Saver is a really interesting technology. It's a derivative of NASA. In fact, our offices are on the Johnson Space Center down at NASA. And when the Columbia went down over North Texas and broke up in space, we lost a few astronauts. It was because tiles cracked, and therefore on re-entry a lot of heat built up to 4,000 or 5,000 degrees. So the founder of our business is a 5-time astronaut. He was put in charge of a program called Return to Space. And so in terms of being excellent at what you go do, there's not much margin for error. So Scott Parazinski, one of our founders, and then Chris, the other founder, who's a longtime friend of mine, was put in charge of that, which was to come up with materials that you would go to seal the tiles that cracked in space. By the way, I was just at Johnson Space Center about 2 weeks ago. Do you realize that on a space shuttle, every tile is a unique form? They're all unique. And every time a space shuttle would come back, all of them would be replaced. So I mean, it's a really interesting thing. So anyway, Scott was in charge of meeting with various thermal engineers and coming up with, let's say, for lack of something better, to go do some sort of caulk liquid that would be applied in space. So again, 5-time astronaut, he's walked outside the space shuttle a couple of times, inspected the tiles, repaired the tiles in space, and then bet his life on the solution. And that's the core of our technology. It's not that exact material, but a derivative of that material. And where we're using it right now, and again, this is really interesting because I've never been in a company this small before and tried to get things going, but what we're doing is we're attacking an industry called the fireproof safe industry. There are 5 million fireproof safes sold out there a year, and it's a misnomer. The reality is a fireproof safe is exactly that. It protects the product interior contents against fire. That means paper, which burns at about 450 degrees, is protected to 350 degrees. So when you go in Office Depot, Office Max, Walmart or whatever and buy that, in fact, your possessions are protected down to 350 degrees. If you're a photographer and have photographs in there, if you put your jump drive in there, you put diskettes in there, you put anything that's resin, it in fact will be destroyed. So the core dream of Chris is he lost some things in a house fire, is to protect those. And so this is a marrying of technology coming out of the Johnson Space Center and Space Shuttle program with this guy's dream to protect precious metals. So hopefully we'll see the product launch in the spring and see where the business goes. But we're going to drive that one to excellence, and it will get off the ground and make Chris a lot of money. And I'm not in it for that. I'm in there because I have a friend who needs help, and hopefully I can help in with that. What I did want to talk about, so that's Dream Saver. Now, Oscar kind of made me seem a little slow about making business decisions, right? I interviewed him, and then 6 months later I hired him. That is a true story, and but what he didn't say is all of the things that needed to do in that organization were to prep it and get it ready for the kind of dramatic change we were going to go do. And a lot of that is recruiting the right people, convincing the organization if we don't change, 1,200 jobs are leaving Columbus, Indiana and going to be in China. And getting the organization ready, creating some anxiety, and getting those things so that the organization was ready for the kind of change and shock therapy that we're going through. So part of that, and I also want to give a little example. I joined another company, and this is again before I hired Oscar. That second company, I walked into the operation, I toured it, it was a manufacturing operation, and I fired the plant manager in 3 days. He was disrespectful, and I told him I can't build a team around you. So I had the wrong person on the bus then, and we needed to make a change. And CEOs coming to me and said, you can't make a change that quick, don't you need to know the business? I said, I can't afford not to make a change that quick. He's destroying our organization from within. He's abusive, and he's gone. So there's a little pre-work. So I can make a decision very quickly, Oscar. I know you told that story, but I want to make sure that they get the context. So part of it, changing an organization, is to make sure it's aligned in values, high integrity, whatever those things are, and business principles. So we did get this thing changed over about 8 months and got the time down in terms of that. We also reduced labor by about 30%, waste by a lot, and other things. But I want to give you a couple of the techniques I used, or we used, that sped Oscar's decision making up. The first one I want to do is we did line walks every day about 9 a.m. And a line walk means we'd go out and walk the various manufacturing lines and look and listen to the operators about what the problems were. And I took my purchasing manager, I took Oscar, who was in charge of lean manufacturing, the maintenance guy, I took everybody that was on my staff, and we walked those lines every morning. And we'd ask the operators what's wrong and that sort of stuff, and then we'd go ahead and put a clock on every support staff member about how soon that problem would be fixed. And the next day, if it wasn't fixed, we'd talk about that and hold people accountable. So that amount of time, usually most of the problems were fixed within an hour or two. In other words, we were listening to the operators and serving the operators and getting it done. And they responded quite well. Another one that I use that is what some of you who have been in lean manufacturing understand the concept of and-on lights. Those are lights that are on production lines, and if the light is green, it means everything's good, and if the light is red, it means there's problems and we need to pay attention to it. So we would walk out to the floor after we installed the lights, again, just to get a sense of urgency, and I'd say, Oscar, flip that light to red, and would time the plant manager and the maintenance staff for how long it took them to get there. And it better be quick. So to get that sense of urgency and that sense of service to the folks on the production floor. Now the one that Oscar really hated, but I know he's replicated it since then, is he mentioned that if you can't say it in the subject line of an email, I probably didn't read it. I would actually read down to the first paragraph, but if you wanted my attention, it's in the subject line. But we bought some egg timers. And it's about a minute for the sand to dry from, or drain from one side of the egg timer to the other. Oscar was very wordy early in his career. He would take forever to try to explain to me why he needed to do something. So I bought an egg timer, go. And if he wasn't finished before the end of it, the meeting was over with. So we got him to speed that one up too. And at the next company, he bought egg timers and gave them to everybody. He claimed it was his idea. Claimed it was his idea.
I bought it.
What I wanted to really talk about, I added that in, but what I really wanted to talk about a little bit is networking and excellence in business, but, by expanding who it is that you know, and that sort of stuff, and how do you communicate with people. First of all, I by nature am an introvert, and there's a lot of people extrovert. Tim, you're a great extrovert. I mean, you're out there and enthusiastic. I have to work at it, and I've had to work at it for a long time. So I'm an introvert. Who else out there is either a degreed engineer or an accountant? All these people are likely to be introverts. We have some more introverts over here, so you guys can relate to that. Okay, so how do you tell at a party, or let's say a networking event, if an engineer is an introvert or an extrovert? And I'm an engineer, so I can do this. Okay, go ahead.
He looks at your shoes.
That's right. The extrovert looks at your shoes in a conversation, not his own. So hopefully I've learned a little bit on that and that sort of stuff. I want to talk a little bit about networking in terms of we communicate lots of times the wrong image. Each of us has a personal brand out there and that sort of thing. And I want to talk briefly about how bad we are at branding. The first thing I have here is a little thing from McKinsey, who is probably the premier consulting company in the world. And they did a little study about how companies communicate their brand image and how customers relate to that brand image. So first of all, and this survey is here, it's the top 90 companies in the world by market capitalization. And basically what it says is a company looks at itself and tries to communicate its values in terms of a brand. What is it saying? And then conversely, what do the customers think about the company, or what is the customer hearing? So the really interesting thing, and I think we do this personally, is in the top 5 messages that the world's best 90 companies communicate, the top 5 messages, the customer only cares about 1. And these are professional marketing organizations of world-class firms. There's another 8 attributes that companies communicate about, and these are the higher ones. That first one was one of the lower things that the customer actually resonated with. So the next 8, let's see, not statistically significant in the customer's mind. That's 5 of them. The next one is a -4. The other 2 have some marginal data. In other words, these professional marketing companies are not communicating to their customers. They spend all this money on branding, they spend all this money on communication, and their customer is receiving and is looking for an entirely different message. Having said that, let's get a little bit personal about networking. If all these professional companies are sending the wrong message, what are we doing as individuals? You think we're any better than the guys that study marketing and have MBAs or whatever and professional organizations? I think we send a lot of bad messages. And so what I want to do is kind of challenge you a little bit in terms of thinking about how you talk with somebody when you're asking for their time. And the first thing is I have a few rules about networking that I think would be very relevant. And let me give you what these companies aren't doing. They're not listening to their customers. That's the basic dilemma. They're telling people about their business from what they think the strengths of their business are, or from what they think the customer is thinking is important. And again, only 1 out of 13 of their primary messages are they aligned with their customer, and it's a pretty small alignment. So they're not close. So what are we communicating? First of all, let me give you some general rules I think about networking and how to do it better. No selling ever. When you meet with somebody and you want some of their time and you want to introduce yourself for the first time, no selling ever. It's not about you selling your message. Okay? Second one, everyone is not a prospect, so you're going to network with people, but not everybody's going to resonate, and that's okay, because you're going to meet a lot of folks, and you'll, over time, distill that down to who's important and who you should follow up with. It is never about you. Networking is not about you. Every single one of us came here tonight to meet people, so it is about us in terms of our motivations in coming here. But in terms of establishing a relationship and getting value out of that relationship, it's not about you. It's about the other party. It's about connecting with the other party. It's about listening more by asking questions and talking less. It's about soliciting them to speak up and share with you. And then maybe when they share with you, you'll start to see a synergy and a common theme that makes the networking, the introduction, valuable in an ongoing relationship. But if all you're doing is spending time sending the message, 90 companies are sending messages and not connecting. 90 world-class companies are not connecting with their... By the way, this wasn't in terms of who they're talking to, they talk to their customers. 90 companies are not connecting with their loyal customers, not casual acquaintances. So listen more and talk less. If you're going to introduce someone else, introduce them with passion and enthusiasm. You know, connect with them. Introduce someone else with passion and enthusiasm. Introducing someone else is taking the focus off of you and putting it on the other person in that relationship. In terms of how do you get the other person to talk, ask good questions. You know, ask good questions. Questions that are real simple like this is, can I get your advice? What do you think about that? You know, the number one form of flattery out there, the most important form of flattery is to ask somebody for their advice and opinion. And if you do that, how important did you make that other person feel? And now will that other person have something to contribute to you over time? It's about building, networking isn't about meeting people, it's about building relationships that are of value later. Okay, so keep the focus on the other person. Another good question, if you did have some good conversation and you learned a little bit from each other, another good question might be, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? And again, now I'm emotionally connecting, thanks for the word, emotionally connecting with the other person, and now I have something that we might have that lasts beyond tonight in the 3-minute time that we spent talking to each other, or the 5 minutes, and now there may be something to follow up on. Or if you did get into talking about business or something in terms of that, how can we collaborate together? You know, every question was about serving the other person's needs in some way. And that gets a good dialogue going and establishes a relationship that will last over time and is important to follow up on later perhaps. Again, assuming there's some sort of synergistic thing in the business between the two of you. So, I would say sometimes you meet somebody for a few minutes, you have some sort of interest, and now you want them to invest some time with you, so you schedule a follow-up meeting with them and say, you know, how about we get together for a cup of coffee next week or something, and that sort of thing, and now you're at another level of dialogue, and that's really good. But I would say even when you go do that, I'm not good with this thing right here. Even when you do that, you know, be respectful of their time. They're investing in you. Treat it as an honor. They're spending time with you. They're honoring you by spending that time. So make their time important and valuable. In other words, a time limit. Terminate the conversation politely. You know, do what you need to go do to communicate things. And this is not about, there's one thing out there that I've heard a lot of, and one of the founders has to go do this to raise money, which is called, you know, an elevator pitch and that sort of stuff. Elevator pitch is about you. And I like it because it makes you concise and think about you and the values you bring to the table. But isn't it so much better to listen to what their needs are before you deliver that pitch? Because if you deliver that pitch, you just did this. Perhaps. Because it's about you and not about them. And if you deliver that pitch later when you know about them, I'll bet that pitch is much more refined and much more on target. It's probably not the 60-second elevator pitch. It's something a little different than that. So I love it. That elevator pitch is great, and they tell you to go do that. But I'd suggest you listen and ask about the other person first before you do that pitch. Or it's all about you. And then, again, after you've had your meeting, follow up politely. I am absolutely amazed at the lack of follow-up out there. I give somebody an hour's worth of time, they come and meet with me, and I never hear from them. And you go, what? What kind of business relationship is that? Even if it's not related. Let me give you a couple of things. The founder that I am working on his behalf for, I met 18 years ago. And I didn't hear anything for 15 years. That relationship is enduring over time and of great value to both of us right now. Follow up. Be polite. Do that even if there's no convergence of activity or interest. You don't know. And that's a value later. I knew you for all 6 months, but don't worry about that. I didn't forget about you. And then back to one of the big themes in terms of like emotional intelligence and that sort of thing. I want to go back into, he mentioned West Point and that sort of stuff. At West Point, when I was there, we ranked everything every day. It's called General Order of Merit. That is to say, we would go to freshman calculus class. By the way, it's 15 semester hours to get through calculus freshman year. We had to prove every theorem in that. And all 1,048 folks that entered that academy with me, we got ranked every day and graded every day in that class. And they posted our results once a week on bulletin boards. And then if you did a little bit better and you moved up in class rank, then they'd put you in a higher section. And if you did worse, they'd put you in a lower section. So everything for 4 years is measured. You're measured physically, you're measured by leadership in terms of surveys from your peers, you're measured by academic excellence. Everything is measured. So this is even better than IQ. Even better than IQ in terms of that. Very competitive place to be. There is no relationship when they've come back after time and done studies between General Order of Merit in the most ranked and competitive institution probably in the world and where people are success-wise later in their careers. There is no relationship. So I was telling Tim a little bit earlier is my sophomore year at West Point, there was a young man came in from the state of New Jersey, and short little guy about my height, big ears stuck out and all that sort of stuff, and it was my job to go ahead as an upperclassman to inflict, let's say, emotional damage to try to flush him out, called hazing, to try to get this young man to quit before he was responsible for people's lives or whatever out there. So I took it very seriously. But it was my job and to go ahead and give this guy a tough time to make sure he was of strong character who could endure difficult times, in addition to academics and everything else. And so I did that. And Marty is a special individual. He's now chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so the #1 military officer in the world, the most powerful officer in the world, didn't do all that well at West Point. Not when I was supervising him, not where he graduated in class rank, and that sort of stuff. And the #1 guy in my class turned out to be not so good. So I absolutely believe that how we relate to people is far more critical than how bright we are. And so the whole emotional intelligence piece, I absolutely believe it is correct, it is right. One of the other things that I'd like to kind of reflect out there, and this scares me about our world. I have here, and most of you all do, the ability to get instant communications about any business problem I might have in my business. And I have the ability to go ahead and intervene in the problem that comes to me tonight and solve that problem and dictate a solution. And that scares me. It scares me from this perspective. In order to learn and make great decisions, somebody's actually ringing me now. How about that? Did you call me, Oscar? Okay. In order for people to make great decisions, it requires two things. One, the separation in time and that sort of stuff. But I think it also requires, over time, ambiguity. If I make the decision every time the problem comes to me, what am I teaching the next generation? And it's great. I mean, having flash communications is a wonderful thing. But if I make the decision, how are we teaching them to make decisions? And isn't our role as leaders and executives and that sort of stuff to teach the next generation how to make decisions? Now, I'm going to go back to the example there. I had to prep an organization, make sure the values were aligned and that sort of stuff. Once we got there, I didn't need to make decisions. So we could be very quick, very fast acting. But I really question the value of all this instantaneous things, and are we developing the next generation? Are we crippling them from the ability to make decisions? Ambiguity, having to collect facts and data to build your world and build your mental models of what's happening out there is really important to go do. And if we continue to intervene and not let those people grow up in a world that isn't making all the decisions for them, where will we be over time? And it's an interesting tension, because a business problem comes up, you have a bias for action, and you want to solve that problem because it costs you money. Sometimes that's the wrong decision. Sometimes it's absolutely the wrong thing. And I think letting people wander out there, letting them fail, make mistakes, and learn is a really good process. But will we be disciplined enough to keep our hands, watch it, let it mature, but keep our hands off enough to see if somebody does the right thing? Particularly from a value standpoint. I want to see if people do the right thing from a value standpoint. And if they don't have the right values, then we have decisions to make. Okay? So anyway, back to kind of the networking and communication. I just want to leave one thought behind. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Spend time learning and showing them you care. Then they'll respond to whatever you have to go do. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Is there a medic in the house? My brain hurts from saying, isn't that interesting, so many times. Wow, did you wake up some memories, Joe? First thing I want to say, my daughter was in 5th grade. We had a meeting of the athletic department. They told us there was going to be no girls basketball at St. John's because there was not a coach. I could not stand up in a room of 30 people and say I would do it. I have not always been this guy. I did stand up and say, I'll do it. Sit back down. And somebody said, who said that? He did. Wow. Some of the things that you said just now really, really resonated. My wife loves Christmas movies. She goes on the Hallmark channel and records everyone to my 1% left of my DVR. The bear game was coming on.